I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
and Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month, we're talking about Doug Liman's Roadhouse remake, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, as well as Rowdy Herrington's 1989 original film, starring Patrick Swayze.
And here we go.
If you've followed us over the years, you likely know we're huge fans of Roadhouse. We love Patrick Swayze, we love over-the-top 80s action, we love modern westerns and Hollywood philosophizing and the gentle masculinity of the late 80s and early 90s, and Roadhouse has all these elements in spades. We even have a clip from the film in the opening of this podcast, if you noticed.
Opinions vary.
We love Roadhouse, but make no mistake, we don't ironically love Roadhouse. We love it because it's a great film. So I can speak for all of us when I say we were all more than curious about Doug Liman's remake starring Jake Gyllenhaal. And the film is far more a Roadhouse film than I anticipated. In many ways, it's a straight remake, with the same character or character types, and story beats as the original film. Gyllenhaal stars as Dalton, the mysterious bouncer who shows up in a small community, here in the Florida Keys, to work at a Roadhouse bar and clean up the riffraff. He earns the ire of the local business magnate / criminal, played by an amusing Billy Magnuson, and takes it upon himself to dismantle the boss's business and free the community from his evil clutches. There are lots of bar fights, and we dig into Dalton's mysterious past. We watch him bond with the quirky locals. We also follow the exploits of the psychotic leprechaun criminal played by MMA superstar Conor McGregor, who is on a literal collision course with Dalton. Much of the film is amusing. The fights are decently choreographed, if filmed with an almost Lubezkian width to the angles, so moments seem like we're viewing them out of a fisheye lens. McGregor is atrocious, but you don't expect much from him in the first place. You can understand that the film tries to play to the hits of easygoing cable TV action classics. It certainly depicts the excesses of Florida in a way few Hollywood stories outside of the works of Harmony Korine or adaptations of Elmer Leonard even manage. But it's unclear whether the film is actually good and not simply watchable. Comparing it to the original clarifies how this film is lacking in charm and the delicious paradoxes that make the 1989 film such a rich text. But that might not be a fair comparison. Every action film made today pales in comparison to the Swayze classic. So like so many modern films, the 2024 Roadhouse is perhaps most a reminder of what we've lost in cinema and how there's no going back to the delirious heights of past cinema greatness.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
This ain't the Holiday Inn, pal.
I'll move it.
A friend of mine suggested I come talk to you. I own a roadhouse out in the Florida Keys. Lately, it's been attracting the wrong clientele. I can pay you good money. Judging by your car, you need that.
Well, I like my car.
Think about it.
I know who you are. Elwood Dalton. Big fan, man.
That guy's got a knife under his shirt. You just take a big step back and pop me in the face. You can do it.
Tell me about this bouncer.
Yeah, it's all nice, like he's Mr. Rogers or something, but then he'll haul off. Really interesting guy, overall.
What do you guys think of the new Roadhouse? Setting aside the comparisons to the original film for a moment, I'm curious about Liman's film. So, does it work as a fun action romp? Anton, what do you think?
I thought the movie was very watchable, kind of the way a good light beer is very drinkable. But I don't know if it is a good movie in its own right. And I can't even talk about the movie as kind of its own thing, and I think that's partly the problem with it. I actually think that Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton is really the only aspect of the movie that achieves enough of its own thing to be something of like merit. And the rest of it, while watchable, while passable entertainment, almost doesn't justify itself.
How about you, Anders?
Yeah, I think that just on its own merits, while there are definitely enjoyable elements of the film, I think even on its own merits, it's fairly underwhelming overall. Like Anton said, I'm not sure that there's enough there to to justify the cost, let alone, if we want to get into its connections to the original. I I guess I just found like even like the things that are meant to be like the most appealing aspects of it, which I think you correctly identify in like the Florida Keys setting, Jake Gyllenhaal, and some of the attempts at action choreography. I think that might be the thing that I think disappointed me the most. I think you have a film with like a real MMA fighter in it, and the film doesn't almost like trust that we're just going to enjoy seeing like straight out fights. It has to do this like CGI enhanced like it's not a GoPro. I looked up, it's like a Red V Raptor camera that can be like attached to worn on you to give it that kind of like first person look at times, and I think it just doesn't work at all, honestly. Like it becomes distracting, and it takes away from, I think, one of the real appeals of films of this type, which is just the purient desire to see a good beatdown, especially when you got Conor McGregor, in his full like sort of insanity here.
Do you think though that the movie, like, because we're talking about it in relation to the original Roadhouse, but like, do you think that the movie, I think you were talking around that it's, it doesn't necessarily warrant its own merits, but I guess, were you expecting more? You also said it was underwhelming.
Well, I think I was, because I don't think Liman's bad.
Like, did you go into this being like, this will be good, or like?
No, I was genuinely curious, because I had talked to some people who liked it. I'd seen some reviews of people who had liked it, and so I was like, and Doug Liman has made some films that I quite like.
Yep.
Right, and I like Jake Gyllenhaal, and I like aspects of his character, and I really like some of that. Like, I think this changing the setting to the Keys is a cool idea. Like Aaron mentioned, even like as gross as I find Florida, like I really have enjoyed some films that like explore some of that. Thinking about Harmony Korine, like The Beach Bum was like one of my top films of like 2019.
But I don't know if the setting. I don't know. Well, like, we can get into that.
Yeah.
Later. I don't know if the setting actually works for this.
I'm just saying on its own merits. It's on its own merits. I could get
okay. So, but it was better or worse than you.
It was worse than on its own. I think it was worse. Like let's just say this film is not called Roadhouse. Let's say the character's not called Dalton, and there's a few like some of the clear parallels to the original are gone. This is like, to me, like, it's a passable, like you said, maybe like TBS Sunday afternoon movie. But even then, it doesn't have the like clarity and the pacing that a lot of those kind of like true B movies of like the 90s and 80s had.
Yeah.
I'm sure some dads are going to stay on the couch and enjoy a lot of stuff in this movie. But then there's also some like things you're like, it doesn't quite have that the touch that you quite hope for. Like, here's an interesting comparison. I have another comparison that I want to get to.
Okay, but like, but like before, like, for me, even though I don't love this movie, I think it's like pretty good, passable entertainment. I actually liked it better than I expected to, because I expected to dislike a Roadhouse remake, in spite of Liman, in spite of Gyllenhaal. So I was actually surprised by the fact that
in my overall review of this movie, I probably lean slightly negative. If this was Siskel and Ebert, I'm doing a thumbs down.
And then Aaron, like, where are you in terms of surprise? Or
I mean, I was surprised by how similar it was. I was expecting more of just the more modern way of regurgitating, or as Josh Larson always likes to say, reheating IP.
Reheating, yeah, that's good.
So I was expecting more of a reheat, where it's just a name and a generalized concept, but not really a remake. And this movie is a proper remake, right? It's not really even a reboot, because it's not really trying to spawn a franchise. It's just like, take the original story, do it in a new setting, same beats, same character.
But it does have more. Well, okay, we'll finish.
No, and I like Gyllenhaal. I like Gyllenhaal in most movies, even when he's doing stuff that's like weird. Here he's like half weird. He's doing some stuff that's pretty strange, but he's not Ambulance level where
exactly.
I'm like, man is just on fire.
Ambulance, he is like on.
And Lyman's a pretty good director. It's kind of weird though, because this is a movie where you would hope that his acumen for good action filmmaking from The Bourne Identity or Edge of Tomorrow comes out. And yet this movie actually, in its tone and its pacing, feels a little bit more like his early indie days of something like Swingers. I still think Swingers is a much better movie than this, but it has a strangely laconic pacing for an action film. It's actually quite long.
There's moments where not a lot happens too. Yeah.
It's just kind of like there's scenes of just
And the
characters
lazy
kinda hanging
camera that
out.
moves through the
Yeah.
bar, definitely Swingers. Yeah.
And
Which may have made him a candidate to direct the film in a sense, like a guy whose first
Absolutely.
big movie is known as a bar movie, but LA is very different from the Keys too.
But like every thing I think about this movie, every time I think about this movie during watching it and everything, like it's just inevitable. You start comparing it to the original and rewatching the original, a movie that's extremely economical in its filmmaking. Like every scene has its purpose and it just moves that engine forward in that way that is often ridiculed, but actually is like a true like element of Hollywood filmmaking that's like a really strong element of like the classical style, right? That every scene has its purpose, every scene builds story or character or creates stakes, and then the original really follows that. This movie doesn't, and so I found myself getting bored at times in this film. The action I thought was one of those cases where I applauded the clear like there's a clear like sense of choreography of blocking, of planning in it, but then the execution of it I did not like. It's the kind of thing where if you filmed it conventionally, I would like it way more.
So can we focus on the action
though?
Yeah.
I think that's what happened is actually I suspect that they actually like have a different set of coverage that is more like traditional action choreography, and then some reason they decided to like spice it up with this like
But is this
bizarre-
done so okay, in terms of the action, so yeah, you have Conor McGregor, Gyllenhaal gets ripped for this, and there clearly
for
is
a
a
while.
sense that there's times where they're doing like, a well choreographed sequence.
Mhm.
But then so let's be specific. Like, what is going on with the camera, which I couldn't really make sense of. Like
Yeah.
after the movie, my wife was sort of like, like, what did you think about?
So there's
the
moments where a
fights? Like,
fight
what's
will
going on
begin.
there?
Yeah, and characters will line up, and often the lead into the fight seems to be pretty normal, and then the actual execution of the fight is really weird. It's almost like once
But
you
it's
go into
moving
fight
in
mode,
and
you almost
out.
you're getting like there's like they're wearing a camera on
Okay.
the actors, and I'm 90% sure just looking on IMDb at the kind of two cameras that they use to shoot the film. And then I think they're also enhancing the punches. They often cut right at the punch, which as Jackie Chan says, people want to see the punch. In fact, you show it twice, right? But they cut away and then they enhance often hits with like CGI. I think sometimes a person will get hit and then they'll switch to an actual CGI version of a character. So their limbs are like, woo! Like, and so you get this like over the top, like at moments, like not over the top in like a kung fu movie or the original Roadhouse kind of way, but
in
over
a
the
sort
top,
of shoddy way.
over the top in the like almost comic book movie, like people being punched across a room or being thrown in ways that are just like the laws of physics. I have this issue with a lot of movies nowadays. Like I remember the Terminator Dark Fate had a little bit of that too. Like there's things I liked about that movie. That's another movie where I didn't like it as much as a lot of other people who were like, oh, it's really enjoyable. I was like, I think once the characters become too much superheroes, like, and they're just leaping around, flying, I'm just like, you know what? I don't know.
So
it just didn't work.
But like, is the camera when the camera's not on the actors? Is it like my intuition was that it was maybe handheld but stabilized in some sense? But then there is maybe some post-production manipulations of the image. There's I don't entirely know what's going on.
There's a lot of digital compositing and stitching going on. I think, but I think it's a twofold thing. The action in this film reminded me maybe most of the work of Ilya Naishuller, like the Russian filmmaker who did Hardcore Henry or that Nobody movie with Bob Odenkirk. I don't mind that movie, but it's a very like video game influence style, because in video games you don't have cuts, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And video game graphics have gotten good enough now that it seems real, but there's something uncanny about the movement and the smoothness of it.
Yeah.
And that's so the camera in this will often like rush into the action with a figure. A figure will run forward, even if the camera's not physically on the figure. It will like move parallel. It'll truck in, and it's gonna
And then it'll whip in a different direction.
It's gonna whip to mask the cuts, but it also gets really close to the point where the bodies warp. So you get this kind of idea of the frenzy of combat, but it's supposed to be close to the hits, so there's like an impact escalation right there. You're seeing the chaos more, but characters getting thrown around, and the fact that it, like, even when it cuts, it doesn't seem like it's cutting. It's all too smooth and a little too like flowing in a digital sameness that it really does remind me of either a cutscene in a video game or a like high res, Xbox One scene in like a Gears of War or something, or like some of these movies like Nash stuff, where it's just because he often films first person action scenes, which was a gimmick at the time he came up with in his short films. It would be like a guy with a gun and he's going to do like a real life first person shooter, which there's a novelty the first time you see that in an actual movie, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, that's cool, you're bringing this over. But executed here, it's in something in a setting like video, a bar, it seems weird, but it's one of those things where I almost wonder whether the MMA elements in the movie, both in a storytelling sense and the presence of McGregor, makes the filmmakers think that they have to incorporate some kind of raw, intense realism to the action. But in the process of approaching it in a way that we can like heighten the impact, quote unquote, or make it seem more like seamless, right? If we don't cut, then people see the actual fight. It actually creates a more unreal effect.
Yes, because what people like about MMA is the reality. This does, in its attempt to capture that, doesn't.
So,
but you'd be better off just framing it like the Octagon.
No, but Anders, go back to what you're saying. Like, what is a filmmaker who his style is not realistic at all, but the actual impact of it and his reputation within action cinema is all about, everybody knows that he does the stunts for real. It's always real. It's Jackie Chan, right? Like the actual filmmaking is super classical, super original Hollywood style construction with that 1970s Hong Kong operatic nature to things. But all the stunts are real, and we all know that Jackie Chan's like, oh, he broke his ankle in this scene, he does this in this scene, but the way it's shot is in such a invisible filmmaking sense that it actually registers as being more real than it is presented. And this, I think, is the opposite. It's the opposite.
Yeah. So I think that, one, given that it's MMA fighting, what they should have done is actually just had a more static shot, long take to let it play out in that really fast grappling intensity of an MMA fight.
Let's see guys just punch each other.
That. And then, two, this style also like undercuts the appeal of the casting. Because like I said, right, like you actually have Conor McGregor. So just him being on screen in the choreography, that actually should be the appeal. Or like, but then also it's like Gyllenhaal trained like tons for this movie. So you're like, they're not like trusting that the casting and the actors can do anything.
Before we start, do you have insurance?
What?
Your coverage good? Like, you have dental?
Oh, haha.
Is there a hospital nearby? Is it like too far?
About like 25 minutes, I'd say.
I just slapped you. Are you all right?
What?
I don't know. Like it seemed to me that, like, I think you're right in how you're describing it. I just sort of felt like it, like, for some reason, in spite of the casting, in spite of the fact that this is like a bar fight movie and not like a superhero action movie, they felt like they had to bring in kind of like gimmicks to sell the action. When really the appeal of a bar fight is just like raw pummeling. Like, you don't need to do that much with it.
Yeah.
The movie relies on a lot of gimmicks for stuff like that. Like the very opening scene, which is kind of funny.
The opening scene's good.
Yeah,
the opening scene's good.
But like even having like Post Malone as the guy who's like fighting in there, like.
But the opening scene is good at like, it's actually economical about conveying
building up the
what's
mystique of this new Dalton, right?
Yeah, it's good visual storytelling.
And that's one of the, so just talking about, to me, what I really liked about the opening scene too was that this is a moment where it conveys the mystique of the character, but it doesn't fall into flashbacks. And if we're thinking about comparison, in the original Roadhouse, Dalton has such a mystique and legend, and it's partly because we don't see his past. But people are always like, oh, that's Dalton, that's Dalton. And then people will be like, remember when? And like all this legend, but the fact that you don't see it and don't know it actually gives it more appeal. And then this movie, I thought they were doing some of that by having this opening sequence where the guy just is freaked out and gets out of the ring and is like, I can't fight that guy. But then later on, they have to go show us. Again, it doesn't trust it. And they have to go show us the moment. Imagine if the original Roadhouse showed us in a flashback when he rips the guy's throat out.
But
Anton, it would lose all of its mystery and power.
But it's also because this film can't, it's too beholden to its MMA branding that it actually has to show a fight in an octagon.
It could have done that without even showing that moment. It could
have
done the build up and then just ended,
But I'm saying is that the movie, like, you can just almost see there's the line on the like producers, like, you must have one octagon fight.
It's funny that explained before I knew there was a Roadhouse remake. I just had seen like scrolling through YouTube, this like, it was like Jake Gyllenhaal enters the UFC ring, shocks, people. And I was like, what? And at that time, I had no idea there was like this promo for the movie. But you're right. There's an MMA, that's a whole aspect.
You know the original conception of the remake, right?
Yeah, Ronda Rousey.
Was going to be gender swapped with Ronda Rousey.
I was more interested in that, frankly.
The MMA
by Liman?
No, I'm not sure.
No. But Joel Silver, that was his idea.
But that was the idea.
Joel Silver involved in this one too?
Because she switched over to WWE.
He produced it again.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Silver.
Aaron and I were commenting the other
night. I didn't know Joel Silver was still alive.
Yes, and that's because I always confuse. I should say occasionally, not always, but I occasionally mix up Don Simpson and Joel Silver in my head of like 80s guys who clearly did a lot of cocaine. But one guy's trucking along and has made so many great movies through the 90s and stuff, and then the other guy's heart gave out.
Joel Silver, Anton, he made like the Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes movies. Those are his, like things like that. Yeah,
which has a kind of MMA scene at the beginning.
Right, and it does. He's responsible for Guy action too.
It's in terms of Gyllenhaal in this film, like
let's talk about that.
I think he's probably the strongest element of it, just because he's a compelling leading man. He's weird enough so that he exudes a conventionality in how he looks and his physique here and his overall aura, but he's a strange enough actor that like there's quirks that even though he's not approaching it the same way that Swayze is, there is a slight disarming
they're the Gyllenhaal
feminine aspect to him, or sensitive aspect, or kind of like wounded boyish aspect.
This is it. Yes, there's a very Gyllenhaal thing in his character of Dalton. Like he brings a lot of his own and past roles, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit also of like his sort of like unhinged, like wide-eyed, Nightcrawler kind of feel going on there. And then also at moments when he kind of goes quiet and like the little smirk is like flashback way back to Donnie Darko.
Yeah.
Like this kind of like, you don't know what I'm gonna do next, kind of thing. Because I think right from the beginning with Donnie Darko, Gyllenhaal had this like kind of he was a sensitive and quiet character, but he has
kind of dangerous.
This dark side to him, right?
Yeah, it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
I like that Gyllenhaal doesn't try to duplicate any aspect of Swayze's Dalton, but instead makes him a piece of actually Gyllenhaal's own like film project of creating these sort of outsider loners. Sometimes they're high energy like Ambulance. This time he's in between, right? He can go high energy for the fights, but then other times he's low energy, distant, removed. People don't know why he's not reacting so much. And so I just found it actually quite remarkable that he makes his Dalton such a Jake Gyllenhaal type character. And you're right, there's a long line all the way back to Donnie Darko, Prisoners, just all the movies he's done. It's this performance is of a piece with it, and the way he does his smile conveys more than than just sort of a smile. Always,
yeah,
right?
It's one of his tools as an actor, right? And lots of the great stars have like their specific things that they do that they will embody a character through, and one of Gyllenhaal's is a smile. It's interesting,
like
Anton.
Really.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Anton, you saying this because it's making me think whether we need to fit Gyllenhaal into a wider conversation of actors as almost auteurish, like in that they shape the narrative around the characters in the films, and they drive the storytelling as much as the directors that they choose. Like somebody like, obviously Tom Cruise is the tops of that, where he's the driving artist behind his films more than the directors, but even somebody like Brad Pitt definitely fits into it. Even somebody like Tom Hardy, you occasionally get those kind of things going, and it's where
weird voices.
Yeah, but there's
the
like, it's not just
quirkiness.
recurring like iconography or performance approaches, but it's also the idea that they're very deliberate in the choices they make in films, even in like the B movies they make, because it adds to a larger like mythos around their type of performance approach or like mystique as an actor.
Think about the kinds of characters he always plays, because they're like, I don't know how he came onto this project. I don't know if he wanted to get onto it or if it was brought to him. But I think it was a good choice because Dalton is this person who he's removed from the settings that he's going to enter, right? Like he's the bouncer, he's the cooler, but he is kind of not a piece with the bar setting. And Gyllenhaal automatically brings that to basically any role he does. We expect him to be kind of an outsider. And we also expect him to have, like, he conveys just by sort of staring, looking, like he'll convey that there's like, he's somewhere else thinking about other things and not always fully present, but that there's a depth. It's not like a blankness. So I think he brings a lot of that to the role. But what I find different though, is that by making him, he's more psychologically vulnerable and wounded than Dalton is. Like Dalton is vulnerable in the sense, Swayze's Dalton is vulnerable in the sense that he is deeply haunted by, the past when he rips a man's throat out. But
Swayze's a figure that, or Dalton's a figure that transcends Anton. He's a real person. Swayze's Dalton.
I know when you said that, I'm like, it's like, I feel like a bit doing the meme of like Michael Fassbender, show me Dalton. No, show me the real Dalton. But
yeah,
like, he's Dalton.
Medium.
He's not Elwood Dalton. He's not no other name. You don't need another name. He's just Dalton.
The name is Dalton.
But so Gyllenhaal, like there's a scene where we see him contemplate suicide, and so he's more broken. He's more transient. The other, you're right. In Dalton, Swayze's Dalton is economically viable. Like money's not a problem for him. He chooses not to fly because he can't afford it. He's riding the Greyhound down to the Keys because his car just got destroyed by the train. He obviously has no cash and he really needs it.
There's that little tackle box that keeps his money in, right?
Where Swayze goes down to,
Kansas City.
To Kansas City, or a little outside Kansas City.
Jasper.
Because of the mission. Because he is compelled by the mission, not really because of the money. And he drives a bad car because that's like the car that he wants to be smashed. But he has a nice car when he wants to drive down
Mercedes.
there.
I love that Mercedes that Dalton
wears
has
nice clothes. Like,
and then he gives it to the dude and the host guy. Yeah. He's like, hey, you just catch these keys.
Here, like the Gyllenhaal Dalton is he's more down and out.
Mm-hmm.
He's more truly broken by what he did. And so, what I found disappointing a bit was that I feel like the story that's constructed, the screenplay, the film, doesn't actually provide what I consider a pretty strong performance by Gyllenhaal with enough to do and to go somewhere.
I agree.
The film doesn't trust that that Gyllenhaal gives us enough to construct the character without these kind of overtly like there's no subtext, right? It's all like, oh, he's suicidal. Oh, here's what happened in the past. Oh, this. So it's a lack of trust in the actor's ability that we've identified, his ability to bring a bit of that mystery, and two, it's just, I think, actually just the norms of screenplay writing.
So it doesn't trust the audience either. It doesn't trust the audience. It doesn't trust that Gyllenhaal can be the compelling feature of the film. And you're like, if you take a movie like Nightcrawler, you're like, he carries that movie entirely.
Yeah. Your description of Gyllenhaal in the last while has made me think that perhaps the 1980s action star he's actually more similar to, despite some shared qualities of Swayze, is Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs. because there is a wounded
That I can
animal
see.
aspect to him. There is a kind of the energy comes out differently in that Mel Gibson in the 80s was very much a like there's too much energy inside and it's always leaking out. Well, Gyllenhaal has it like there's so much anger and pain and energy inside, but he has had it clamped down so much that it's like an implosion inside him constantly.
Yeah,
That,
it's
like,
only
is
a movie like
dragging him down.
Ambulance where it's breaking out.
You occasionally get aspects of this though in like Gyllenhaal's like even like public persona, like outside of movies. Like I remember I still never actually watched the movie, but like the press conferences for Spider-Man: Far From Home, when him and Tom Holland, you feel always almost the sense that like Tom Holland is just being like dragged around by this like crazy guy to like go and do all these things. Like, come on, man, sing this song with me on like the radio and do all these like you're like, and Tom Holland's like, I don't know what to do. This guy's like, so like there's a little bit of that in Gyllenhaal's like off-screen persona too, at least.
Yeah, it's just it's the I'm saying this partially because I rewatched Lethal Weapon 2 a few days before I watched these, and so I've been on a bit of an 80s kick again. It's one of my favorite action movies, and there is this. However much this movie is not constructed like an 80s film, however much it it doesn't have the approach to action or even the trust in the cinematic tools of conventional Hollywood storytelling that an 80s film does. Gyllenhaal's performance would probably fit quite well in an 80s movie and probably work. Like, I don't think his performance has elements of a modern film in the way that it approaches like trauma and stuff, but it's and how a character bears that out in terms of reaction, but it is a compelling enough performance with enough antecedents in action cinema itself that it's not like it's the thing that's working here, and it's just too bad the rest is not coalescing around it.
Yeah, I think you're right that by noting things like an 80s Mel Gibson, you see that it's also not so distinct from like the genre that you could have worked with this very easily.
Well, I'm just thinking the scene where he's like suicidal, and like that is a scene in Lethal Weapon 1 that kind of perfects it, right? It's any action movie that does that is inevitably going to have that callback to Lethal Weapon because it's such an iconic film.
Speaking of the cast, like the other thing in terms of contrast with the original, when I was rewatching the original, I was like, wow, like all the supporting cast in this movie is so good. It constructs like a Simpsons type Springfield where like I know all the different people in Jasper and they all have these nice
the town
little
feels
characterizations. Whereas
it
here,
feels like a real town.
Okay, I'll say like Conor McGregor is one note. He only has that sort of like that grin all the time, but I enjoyed him. Like, whereas my problem with the movie is that basically every other supporting character, with the exception of Billy Magnuson's baddie,
Brant,
which goes well with sort of the comparison to Wesley, like Brant, the Brants, like that it works for a last name. But like most of the supporting characters were kind of boring, and when they delivered these lines that were echoes of the original, it was just like it seemed like someone was holding a gun to their back, being like, "Now you got to say something like he should be bigger," or "Now you got like." And it's just like, it seems so unbelievable and awkward. And you're like, do they get have they seen the original Roadhouse? Do they understand what kind of movie they're in? Probably not. I don't know.
Even like you have like when a like actual like in my opinion like a character actor who can be interesting like Joaquim de Almeida as like the sheriff, like even he doesn't really get a whole lot to do in this movie. He's not like he doesn't stand out, even though he's one of those actors who can do that kind of stuff. So.
Oh, and the love interest is like completely a wash.
A blank.
Yeah, I forgot. I honestly, I'm not joking. I forgot she was like that as a character until you mentioned the dad, and then I was like, oh yeah, there's a love interest.
Well, in the movie, we meet her and we know that like he's going to see her again, but she's not memorable, and she doesn't like. We don't feel anything for the relationship. Where again, I think Swayze and Kelly Lynch do a good job in the original.
And Ewan's actually, I think, the one element, if we're comparing to the original, that like there's many elements comparing to the original that this film is lacking on, basically everyone. But one thing that is a felt absence is Sam Elliott, and that role, the mentor character.
There's no
Mentor.
Obi-Wan. There's no Obi-Wan in this movie, right? There's no like the wise mentor master who's gonna come. It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, because also then you miss on that. It's like, sorry, you want Wade Garrett. I tried.
Yeah. No, it's like, I want the best.
Wade
Garrett's
the best.
I want you. The line that sums up the whole film, I want you.
You.
And he like he holds on it. I want you.
Kevin Teague as is
his
great.
Look, man,
he's like great. The grins that he gives are
such it's the. But like that to me is why like I love the original. Why after many rewatches and thinking through what's going on, I think it's a great film because that again in like the 2024 version, the bar owner, like I don't really understand her motivations and I don't really sense that she's like in command of the bar and is trying to like make something of it. Whereas the limited time we get, with the employer owner in the original, it's like I feel his like desire to like I just want to make this place into a respectable good bar.
There's little touches in the original, like when he goes up and
yes, but those are the
changes the graffiti from being obscene to like
he changes the graffiti on his on his place is being torn apart, and he takes the time to correct the graffiti to fix it to make it
not obscene,
not offensive, not obscene, and like that moment, that's like perfect characterization storytelling where you're like that conveys a lot of information.
Jessica Williams, her character, like which is also was funny when I realized that she was like, I think she was on the Daily Show and stuff right back in the day.
Oh, I know, but it's like Hollywood.
But I was like, her only motivation is just that it's like, oh, it was my uncle's bar or whatever.
Yeah, and then they try and throw vague stuff about civil rights.
It's not her fault. Like, I'm just saying,
we'll
that's
just have some pictures on the wall to explain
that we can actually imagine the character having. And on top, like, we should talk about the actual bar itself and the
in the setting, because.
It doesn't seem real,
the keys,
frankly.
No, well, so I like the keys setting in theory. Mm-hmm. I think one reference point I'd also point out, you guys, I don't think you watched it, but Bloodline, one of my favorite TV shows of the past couple decades.
Yeah, I never seen it.
You're literally the biggest fan of Bloodline. Anton just sits there thinking about Ben Mendelsohn and being like,
Ben Mendelsohn,
great performance.
It's not just him.
And then everybody else is like, that Netflix show that like can't. No, like very few people watched. I'm sure it's fine.
But is it in the Keys or is it in mainland Florida?
No, it's the Keys.
Oh, okay.
But so one thing my wife said, and I agree with this. In the original, right, it's this like it's small town
Missouri.
We sense that the people are showing up raw, ready to fight. And it's like sweaty, it's hot, it's it's this honky tonk bar. Whereas here, we were like, why are people like angry in this place?
Yeah.
You have this beautiful
tourist beach place, right?
I would expect a bunch of girls drunk wanting to like sleep around and flash and stuff.
Right.
Not
or
like
a bunch of like frat boys. Like
it's such a nice bar setting, a beautiful beach out there. You're like, how are people just not coming in there and like feeling more relaxed?
That's not everybody Jimmy Buffett all the time here.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's just
Well, the bar itself, like it's again visually, there's nothing really wrong with it, and I actually kind of like the other bouncer characters, like the one guy. I forget the actor name. He's from like the White Lotus. He's in the first season. He's like the one guy that Armand like seduces with the drugs and stuff, and like the whole camaraderie and like the way that he's teaching them and stuff. That stuff hits, but I think there's a twofold thing here, Anton, where it's not just that the bar and the way that people react to the bar seems fake, is that also the situation that Brandt is like forcing upon this so-called community does not seem real in the way that it does in the original.
Yeah, it doesn't
seem
like
it just seems like they want to buy up the
Baron.
land. In the original, it's very much, it goes one deeper because it presents Jasper as a frontier town. And Wesley is not just a crook or like a mafioso who is.
I'm bringing them J.C. Penney.
No, he's not just a mafioso guy, right?
He's civilizing them too.
He's a cattle baron.
Yes, he's bringing stuff that they like, but at the same time, he's controlling everyone. And he's shaking them down.
If you watch any Western, you're like, oh, he's the cattle baron who's brought so-called civilization to the frontier and thus controls that over everyone. And so you don't get a sense of the interrelated community between all these side characters that like it's something that registers so strongly in the original that like all these business owners that including Kevin Teague, including Red, including the old man that he stays with, that they all have these relationships with each other.
Yeah,
this
that's why
it comes together at the end.
Yeah, it's so
Wesley's house.
That's
so
why
it
it said
pays off so
Springfield,
well.
right? Because he's like he's also Mr. Burns in the town.
Yeah.
But the other thing is just that like it
weaving down the road to Sweetest
the original Roadhouse, like there's so much about this movie that's absurd, but you're like, but at least it takes the respect to the audience to say, okay, Wesley has set up a business organization, you know, like one of those like sort of business growth sort
it's
of
a chamber of commerce type thing.
Yes. And he's like, that's how he's shaking people down. You're not paying your fees to the community. And then he escalates when when people start to push back. It does get ridiculous, but what I mean is at least it starts. This movie starts.
Did you have insurance?
The very starting point is guys on motorbikes just showing up and like beating up everyone.
It just immediately turns into like a thing where the entire bar is trashed.
Yeah, I just can't.
Did anyone not come in and just be like, just give me an envelope of cash first?
But it doesn't have the rough and tumble. No. The other thing is that it doesn't have the rough. So one thing that the original Roadhouse does well is that the rough and tumble atmosphere of the Double Deuce when Swayze's Dalton first arrives is shared by the patrons and some of the bouncers. Because remember, the bouncers just immediately smashing guys, throwing them into tables, doesn't care. Completely.
It's like Wesley's nephew, right? Is the
he has to get rid of people.
Yeah. Exactly. Nobody.
He has to case the place and understand it before he steps.
And there's a great scene where that's one scene where we understand how the entire bar works, all the problems that need to be resolved there. Perfect.
You're using how many bottles you're pouring this many bottles per hour. Yeah. You're skimming $100 off the top.
Well, that's the next scene where he sits down and does the lecture.
No, remember the line I always love is that because Swayze's leaning against the bar, and if you're not drinking, you're out. It's like, and then it's like, oh, don't mind him. So there's another comparison here. Compare the annoying bartender friends in both. They both have the same approach. They even both barge into his home.
They say a lot of the same lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
Carrie Ann.
The same.
Yeah. Although she doesn't bring like breakfast and see him get up naked.
There's no sheer awe over his like raw buttocks. Like, like literally she like is gasping for breath over how beautiful he is.
And also the big thing this film doesn't have is no Jeff Healey.
Yeah,
oh man,
it's the music. I don't.
No Cody.
I don't remember any of the music that's played. We're like,
but whereas
the original has a great
music
soundtrack.
in the original is so good.
Well, but Cody's not just the musician; he's also a old friend sidekick type character.
He's the troubadour. Like he's the troubadour. He's what's his name in Robin Hood?
Alan Adale.
But
who's the actual character name? But yeah.
No, but his character, his character, even it's weird. I've watched the movie so many times, but I didn't even pick up on it. But like he hints at not just a shared past, but also that like he has been with Dalton on other adventures where he cleans up other bars. Like,
but he's also the person who then, at certain points, when he's like, the name is Dalton, and he calls the audience in the bar crowd's attention to Dalton. So he's the one who's helping to always build up the mystique.
And a lot of old westerns would have characters like that, right? Like the singing cowboy. Like I just recently watched, Hail Caesar, like the Hobie Doyle type characters, right? Or like what's his name in Rio Bravo? Or if you want to take it in a comedic version, have you guys ever seen Capaloo?
No, I haven't.
Like with Lee Marvin and Jane Fonda, but like it actually has Nat King Cole as the bard. But like, so you have this idea of like the chorus essentially also that like tells the story.
It's Will Scarlet in the Robin Hood Tales who is the person who sings the songs.
But he's more than just a bard in Robin Hood.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so is this movie, Aaron? You think it's a pretty straightforward remake?
Yeah.
And I agree in the sense that it's not that like what was the term? Like the reheated. There's a lot of engagements or duplicating aspects. But I also feel like there's an aspect of this being kind of, it's not a sequel, but like that sort of legacy sequel or requel aspects in it. And what I mean by that is the way it does, like the way it takes lines from the original and then repeats them. Usually if they're not spoken by Jake Gyllenhaal, they're almost like mechanical, like people are doing like lines in a liturgy and they feel like they just have to say them now. And it felt to me like when I'm watching like a franchise, legacy sequel, requel, and the way it has to incorporate these things, because people are like, well, they've got to say this line.
You know what the most egregious one is, right?
The Flash?
No, when he's like fighting Conor McGregor's Knox character the first time, and he actually, as he gets punched and he's being thrown back into the bar, he's like, "Be nice." He actually says that as a quick throwaway, and it's man. It's like that. when I heard that in that context, I was like, you do not understand the philosophy of Dalton at all.
Be nice.
But that sounds like it sounds like they felt like we have to have him say "be nice."
Yeah,
this Dalton's not a philosopher in any sense.
No,
you could never imagine him reading the Beat Poets.
Yeah, he never studied philosophy. Man's search for meaning.
All that bullshit.
Man, Dalton, like Swayze's Dalton is such an insanely good character, and Swayze it's not even the most iconic Swayze character. Like, let's be honest, Bodhi is a more iconic character. And he's in some ways more like he is more suited to Swayze's strengths as an actor.
Bodhi's more iconic?
In the grand sense of cinema, I think so. Because really? I think the relationship between
you wouldn't have Fast and Furious without.
If you take the scene between Keanu and Swayze and like the shooting in the air, I think that moment is more iconic than anything in Roadhouse in terms of overall cinema input. Like maybe, and I think a lot of people also like Point Break is considered a great film, kind of without quibble.
Yeah, but I guess
Roadhouse has a lot of people who don't like it. I think Roadhouse is
okay. Maybe this is where I gotta make the case then, because I feel like my sense is that I don't know regular people who few of them might remember Point Break. I understand like a lot of critics and people like it, whereas like I know lots of people who are just regular people who watch movies who are like, oh yeah, Roadhouse. That's
but
great.
Equally, everybody knows. But then if you're gonna go there, Antoine, I think equally you would say the Dirty Dancing is his most iconic role.
Oh, it probably actually, yeah.
It actually might be.
And it's a great run. That's a good movie too. It really is.
I'm not saying Point Break is
like that run.
Yeah, I just feel like
Dirty Dancing, Roadhouse, Point Break. He did them like boom, boom, boom. Ghosting.
Yeah,
like it's
the way that.
No, but
why is it
a star? Like an absolute
Anton,
star.
let me just clarify. Maybe it's the fact that like Bodhi has the philosophizing aspect to him, but Bodhi's also like he's the villain, so he's more actively dangerous. There is an edge to him. He is Swayze being a little bit more actually flamboyant and like outre in the performance than Dalton. He's literally like he's Swayze like going into all of his bag of tricks, and the character is clearly shaped 100% around Swayze as a performer.
And he even goes back to that well in Donnie Darko, the Jake Gyllenhaal connection.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
When he's playing that sort of the guy who makes those videos,
Love,
the sort of the psychologist. But but why is it that what I just find interesting then? Why is it that like? Is it because of Catherine Bigelow in sort of establishing her as an auteur that
it was a big
sort
hit.
Of I guess film.
It's the Keanu
critics
Reeves
have been able to
absorb. It also was like when Keanu's first like post Bill and Ted, his first like like action.
But like how is it that movie has become reputable?
No, but it was always reputable because it was a Bigelow and produced by Cameron. Like it's like James Cameron produced it, right? Like it was the key film that came out of their marriage, like.
That and Strange Days.
But that was they were already separate, but they wrote it.
No, I know, but it was written prior. Bigelow is, as a theorist, that film also like clearly is the work of a academic, right? Like there's an element beyond just like the filmmaker there. There's the
she leans even harder into the Hong Kong melodrama in some moments and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, she knows how to deconstruct action conventions, so she uses that to bolster her like use of the conventions.
Whereas
in that Rowdy Herrington has
the original Roadhouse is more akin to the Casablanca, where it is by its use of sort of the Hollywood studio system and unconsciously using archetypes constructs something that I would argue is of lasting greatness, but it's not a self-conscious construction.
So I guess what I'm saying here, Anton, with Swayze's Dalton, like I think Swayze's Dalton is truly one of maybe even the like most interesting screen creation characters. Like he is so endlessly fascinating. He is a character of such paradoxes. It's like I just want to know more about him. He's just so alluring and like strange and paradoxical. But the thing is that what I'm saying here is that I actually think the interest of the conception of Dalton in the 89 film goes beyond Swayze as the one in the role. He embodies it so well, but the character is so strangely conceived that it actually goes one further.
Because you guys have often said as well that like Roadhouse, whether intentionally or not, is, and I think it probably, at least from the the screener, and Harrington's a very capable director. Like I think it is kind of summing up a lot of the trends. It comes right in 89. That summer of 89, I was just looking through the list of films that came out that summer. It's an insane summer because it was like the summer actually. We have to remember this is the movie that came out the same summer of Batman, of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade,
Lethal Weapon 2.
Lethal Weapon 2. So that summer, and I think it's sort of acting as like the capstone to like those 70s and 80s
Yes, it's internalized all this aspect.
It's the apotheosis. It's the transcendence of
whereas
80s
Bodhi is the beginning of something new. Right.
Yeah.
And it was like if you build to Roadhouse and then Bodhi's right here, and they're very, very similar in a lot of ways, and it keeps going.
One's starting to go down. Yeah.
Because he becomes more villainous, it becomes more over like some of the 90s stuff gets brought in.
So if you go to Umberto Eco when he's talking about Casablanca, right? The way he says that Spielberg and Lucas construct their films, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, these things are self-consciously constructed using those elements.
Right. Whereas
and that's what Point Break is.
Yes.
Whereas Roadhouse is it's the unconscious production of this.
Because Cameron and Bigelow are
of the cult film, which is perfect because Roadhouse is a cult film.
Is like, and Rowdy Herrington is like a Michael Curtiz, like who's like a journeyman who's made, he obviously did not have the same career. Don't worry, but like, he is one of those like Hollywood journeymen who are people who really understand the system and how to use the filmmaking techniques in that way.
Yeah, and the original Roadhouse is not camp. Like, let's be clear here. It's not camp in either definition.
Funny at times.
Oh yeah,
but intentionally funny too.
No, but it's not camp in the the like
Sontag
style
sense
of
camp.
But it's also not the more modern conception of camp like a Riverdale where it's like tongue in cheek, deliberate, a queer sense of camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like a flamboyant excess that is self-knowing, right?
Well, because so in the original Roadhouse, it's absurd because everything is done seriously. It's not absurd because it recognizes itself as absurd and presents itself as absurd, or is trying to be really absurd.
But there are things exactly that we've mentioned, like Brad Wesley's like ridiculous monster truck, like the fact that Brad Wesley's mansion is across the lake from like.
But those are not. They're not portrayed as like. There's never a wink.
No, it's just
there's
like
never a distancing.
Or, like you said, these are like archetypes. These are just like it's taking the archetypes seriously. And
on rewatching it, it's like it makes perfect sense that
of course.
The hero and the villain would initially drive at each other and almost crash, and then they would take up homes, one humble, one a lavish mansion across from each other.
And you'd be like, this isn't.
And at different points, they can actually go out on the balcony and sort of stare at each other and think about. And we know that they're going to arrive at their sort of culmination fight.
So I was thinking this while watching Lethal Weapon 2, which is a movie I actually think has a lot more in common with Roadhouse than a lot of other 1980s action movies, in that Lethal Weapon 2, probably more than any of the franchise 80s action films, is like similar to Roadhouse. It takes all the elements that work in action cinema and it like pushes them as far as they can go before they would collapse. But it's like everything is heightened. So like in Lethal Weapon 2, it's like the bad guys are racists. but then they're also like embezzling money, and they're also they're also these drug dealer kind of characters. But then the bad guy can't just be like a racist, psychopathic murderer. He also is responsible for killing Riggs's wife, and he does. You know what I mean? Like it's everything is. It's like, well, that's a perfect coincidence. It's like, well, it is, because it makes him angry and he has to get more revenge. Like, you know, it's everything works in service to the overall entertainment factor of the story. And Roadhouse is working in a similar sense, where it's like Lethal Weapon 2. It understands what the parameters of 80s action cinema are, and it knows how to, you know, turn it up to 11. But like, it's not like it's going beyond what is capable of sustaining. It pushes it, and it understands that within this framework, an actual amplification is actually not just possible, but very fitting, because the whole thing itself is an absurd, heightened state of American masculinity, American Western storytelling, all these different elements that are coalescing, right? And it does it in such a way, through the use of classical Hollywood filmmaking techniques, through visual storytelling, through dedicated performances that don't wink at the audience, that it actually is capable of doing everything at that 11 level without breaking anything.
I want to pick up on something you mentioned there, which is the idea of the way it deals with masculinity. And I think this actually has something to do with camp and different views and understandings of camp. And it also connects it into Point Break, which is that Roadhouse is like, you know, in Sontag's conception of camp cannot be intentional, right? It has to be this like excess, like this kind of thing that like spills over, right? Almost like it's not quite kitsch, but it's like built on like that, right? And then when you get to that sort of the queer voguing kind of camp, it's like a knowing, like performative aspect, right? And especially post 90s with like notions of like gender performity and things like that, you get into that idea because it's something that you put on explicitly and like play with, right? Roadhouse is like not quite, it's not really there, because it understands these tropes and all these things that have gone into building these kinds of characters. But as you say, Anton, it takes it seriously, right? And I think that Point Break then does pick up from Roadhouse, because it also is interested in the way that we've constructed these action cliches, masculinity, but then it like explicitly brings in almost this bromance, right? Like this notion of like male comradeship and like attraction in a sense, and you know, almost like underlying you know, sexual tension and things at times. And whereas Roadhouse hints at that in understanding in the same way that like that is where that notion of sort of masculine excess, if you want to say that, goes, but it plays it fairly straight in a lot of ways.
Well, so I think what a lot of what's going on in the film is that it takes things that are subtext in action films and it makes them text. And so the instead of having a suppressed, you know, erotic tension between the acrobatic henchman and the main character, at one point the character will just say, you know, I used to do guys like you in prison. And it's said worse than that, but you know, in case I don't want to get taken from YouTube down.
I used to f guys like you in prison.
But it doesn't just do it on sort of whether it's homoerotics or things like that. If you take like, it's interested in this idea that the peacemaker in Westerns and then their extension, the action film,
but also medieval stories,
and all the way back to medieval, they embody a tension because for them to make peace, they have to be able to wield violence. And it takes this like theme, and then it just explicitly says that this character at one point tore a man's throat out. So he has this lethality that's so present in the story. Again, like nothing is kept like subtle.
And then we actually see him rip a guy's throat.
Yes. So, but like, it's these things that are like, those are undercurrents in how many action films. And then it just brings that straight out and like puts it out there on the screen.
And it even puts out the way that like people like recuperate like a character so quickly after they do something like that. Like a lot of other action movies, like you're like, man, if someone really did all this stuff, they'd really be like, you know, very few action movies, aside from something like even like Clint Eastwood's, like actually like deal with the fact that like, you know, Dirty Harry, people are like, come on, man, like getting a bit much here. But you know, in this, like, you know, he rips his throat out, and at first, like Doc Elizabeth, she's like, oh, you know, what are you doing? And then, you know, pretty soon she's like, but we need him, you know, essentially, like, this is the man who can do it, right? And that's the tension of the Western, is that the person who often lays down the law cannot usually be recuperated into the community that he saves, kind of thing, right?
It's the Searchers ending. Yes,
Yeah.
Ethan Edwards as the lead.
But here, you know, he gets a little bit more of a, you know, happy ending hinted at. So
it's a very mechanical, classical Hollywood ending where it ends right away. And there's a lot of old movies where you're always like, if you had like a few more scenes, what actually would be resolved between some of these things? But they just end at a very quick
because they've hided the gun. That's where it's
nothing bad will happen.
What are you guys talking about?
What did you see, Tinka? And it is like the sound effect, and it's like the bear fell on me.
Everyone starts laughing.
And then the sound cue, and then it hits up to Jeff Healey to bridge you to the next scene, and you're like, yes.
Yeah, Jeff Healey is so good. I actually went last week and listened to a whole bunch of his like music. So I think he was genuinely gifted like bluesman.
Yeah. Before we end the conversation, and I think we're pretty much done talking about the new one. We're just singing the praise of the old one because it's so fun to talk about the old one. I want to again raise the point that like the film is not just interesting conceptually, it's not just executed interestingly, it's like it's shot in a very deliberate manner. And I always think of the scene where Dalton's laying down his rules, and the scene starts, he's wearing his tight black t-shirt, he's literally in like a beam of light, and he's got his
arms crossed.
Yeah, but there's also like the cigarette smoke. He's like a beat poet laying down the new law. Like it's there's such deliberate, and then he's at the top of the stairs and he comes down the stairs to engage with them, and then he ends up back up. Like it's the way that it builds using this iconography in the scene, the way the shots are constructed, and then you go into the action scenes, and the action scenes are all like very coherent, and there's, you can see a lot of like the practical stunt work of like tables being smashed and guys getting broken up. I always also think of how it's a relatively minor fight scene. It's the one where they're delivering the booze, and then Wade Garrett shows up, and he's like
on the platform at the back of the bar.
Yeah, and he's like, what? He's like, well, I'm not going to, you know, like he says like something, his comeback is so like vulgar and hilarious. And then he punches the guy in the crotch and hits his knee. And then after the fight, while him and Dalton are like recuperating, is so bloodied, he's like, biggest man, take out his knee.
Real fast, yeah. Good lessons.
You want to fight, dickless?
I sure ain't going to show you my dick. Damn, that hurts, doesn't it?
They're so, but like the scene is so like easygoing, hilariously like fun, but the fight, the fights are like super memorable in the movie too. They're all really coherent and enjoyable, and but you also get a sense that it takes like a physical toll,
and it doesn't
on Swayze and on Sam Elliott.
And it doesn't have to escalate it beyond, like, if you ever want like
nothing's blowing up until the final
fist fight movie, you know, at the most we get, you know, the henchman chasing him on a motorbike for like,
but then he jumps
30 seconds,
onto him.
You know, whereas, you know, in going to the new movie, right, they have to build in kind of like this ridiculous boat chase, which kind of has like weirdly truncated like special effects that look really weird.
Also Dalton's, I don't agree with Dalton's use of a bomb. In like, I understand that in the original, Dalton drives the car and like baits them with the car so that they blow up the car, but you never get the sense that Dalton's rigged that car with a bunch of like C4 to explode. But in the new one, I'm like, wait, Dalton's just got like a timed bomb to blow up the bad guy? Like, that's not fair.
I've always, one thing I do want to mention is my weird thing, how I've always said how like Roadhouse kind of has this like interesting connection in some ways to like The Big Lebowski and like the Coens, actually more broadly a little bit. I mean, obviously there's the connection that Ben Gazzara is in both films and Sam Elliott, right, as the sort of the cowboy Wade Garrett character, and Ben Gazzara's Jackie Treehorn and Brad Wesley. But also the sense that both films like are sort of self-consciously drop being characters into that late 80s, early 90s, but with like these genre patterns of the past, whether it's the film noir or the Western, right? And things like that. But also the Coens, like I know they have a different tone to some of their things, but they also are pretty good at creating like a cast of characters where like people are really memorable and little roles and things like that. So I do wonder if the Coens like Roadhouse. I've never read anything about them liking it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they actually did like it, especially, you can see almost like characters like Emmett Walsh from like Blood Simple being like in the same town almost, but a little more, dark version of it kind of. So I don't know. I think it's worth like just bracketing there. But it's interesting how these films, like the way films engage, which returns us maybe full circle to the original, or not our first topic, the new Roadhouse, and the way that like when you remake something, like I think that it's a very fine line of how you do it and how you make a film. And the film that I would compare the new Roadhouse to in a weird way is the film Den of Thieves, which is in a negative sense, in that Den of Thieves is with Gerard Butler is quite clearly a riff on Heat, like Michael Mann film, like almost down to being a remake in a few ways. But it doesn't try to like tie us to the original through any like kind of references and things like that. More trusts its audience and the setting of like LA and bank robbers and stuff like that to like get it. And then therefore it's like, I still think it maintains its sort of its own identity, and it's like it stands as a movie on its own. So we spent a lot of time in this podcast saying how much better the original is than the new one. And some people might be like, but like we said, I'm kind of negative on it. Maybe you guys are a little bit more positive or not. I don't know. We're like,
I'm a little positive.
Yeah. I don't think it's a terrible film. I think there are a lot worse films, but I don't think it's unfair ultimately though for us to compare these two, because when you title your movie Roadhouse and you have a character named Dalton, you're inviting that comparison. You're explicitly saying, hey, this thing you liked, look, here's another version of it, right? And so, it kind of will ultimately, it has to be a pretty good movie to get a pass while changing some of the key elements that were appealing in the original.
I also think that the way this remake is done shows at least some progress on the reception of the original Roadhouse.
I'm hearing a lot more people coming out as Roadhouse fans. So
I originally sought out the original Roadhouse when I read Kevin Smith's article. Maybe it was in GQ. I can't remember. I
think it was, yeah.
In maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. And he basically said Roadhouse is, the best, worst movie I've ever seen. And for a long time, Roadhouse has had this idea that it's a so bad it's good type of movie. And if they were going to remake a so bad it's good kind of movie, it would have to be in the vein of like, let's say, a Snakes on a Plane type movie. And what you clearly see by this remake is that they're not approaching Roadhouse, the original, anymore as a so bad it's good movie. They're actually just taking it as kind of like a action movie classic that they want to update. And so at least I can take some satisfaction in that.
Give me the biggest guy in the world. You smash his knee, he'll drop like a stone.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.